Mark 12:25 states, "For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven."
From this verse, we learn that angels do not die or marry. Sons of God who marry should be humans. Throughout the New Testament, the term sons of God or children of God is applied exclusively to humans.
If these are strictly human encounters, what are the options?
If the term sons of God refers to humans, then who could they have been? Perhaps those who called upon the name of the Lord, the generations of Seth.
Then who were the daughters of men?
The daughters of men could have been descendants from the generations of Cain, or perhaps they came from the indigenous populations that coexisted with Adam's generations in the same region, either Ubadans or Sumerians. On the other hand, some have contended that what has been translated sons of God, Beni Elohim, refers instead to sons or servants of pagan gods. A clear example of this can be found in Exodus 18:11, which states, "The Lord is greater than all gods," Elohim. Daughters of Ha'adam in Hebrew, or the Adam then, would be Adamite women. Using this line of logic, Genesis 6:1-2 could be translated, "And it came to pass when Adam's generations began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons or servants of the gods," Sumerian kings perhaps, "saw Adamite daughters that they were fair." What comes through in either translation is that there were two distinct populations. Some were in the covenant line from Adam, others were not, and they were intermarrying. Writing in 1860, William Edward Lane concluded, "The most obvious meaning beyond dispute is that the men and women here mentioned were of different races, and hence that the former saw in the latter a beauty surpassing that of their own women." What would be the consequence of such mixed marriages? Reduced lifespans.
Genesis 6:3, "And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years.
So possibly marriages between long-lived Adamites and the short-lived indigenous populations resulted in children with intermediate lifespans. And what we see in succeeding generations in Genesis is exactly that. Noah was perfect in his generations, Genesis 6:9, and lived 950 years. Shem, who died at 600 years of age, was the first to suffer a speedy demise. Arphaxad, Shelah, and Eber failed to make it to 500. The next 5 generations did not see a 250th birthday. Abraham and Isaac passed away at 175 and 180, respectively. Jacob died before reaching 150, and so it went. Intermarriages between the long-lived Adamite population and their short-lived neighbors produced children who died off at increasingly younger ages. Gradually, the results of mixing took its toll.
Another point, spirit beings are presumed to be immortal. If angels or demons were involved in these marriages, the result should have been a lengthening, not a shortening of lifespans. Furthermore, the flood wouldn't have solved anything. Spirit beings don't drown.
Also telling us that Noah was perfect in his generations carries the implication that there were others whose generations were less than perfect. In fact, we do have a small amount of evidence to support the idea that these were human relations and lifespans were affected.
The pre-Adamic city of Katal Huyuk was excavated, and an examination of the skeletons found there yielded an average age of death of about 34 years old.
By way of contrast, Thorkild Jacobson noted that the post-flood kings of Lagash, Semites probably, not only lived extraordinarily long, they also lived extraordinarily slowly. This is his translation of one document. In those days, a child spent 100 years in diapers, literally in bits of the wash. After he had grown up, he spent 100 years without being given any task to perform. He was small. He was dull-witted. His mother watched over him.
Archaeological discovery also suggests mixing of covenant generations with non-covenant generations.
Language elements also show the evidence of mixing. This comes from Jacquetta Hawkes' book, The Atlas of Early Man. Another break in cultural tradition and an acceleration in civic advance began around 4000 BC. Some historians believe that these changes were due to the arrival of the Sumerians on the plain. The language, however, when it came to be recorded, does suggest a Sumerian tongue overlaying a more primitive one that might well have been that of the Ubadans. It also contains some Semitic elements, and it is likely that Semites were already drifting into the valley from the north.
From various sources, then, we have evidence of a mixing of generations and a shortening of lifespans for those in the line of promise, the emerging Adamite generations.
This brings us to another difficult passage that has proven to be hard to understand.
Genesis 6:4 says, "There were giants, Nephilim in Hebrew, in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown."
There are a number of questions that spring to mind. Were these Nephilim the resulting offspring of the aforementioned unions, or is this verse identifying the time frame in which these men lived? We might paraphrase that as, do you remember the time when the sons of God were taking wives from the daughters of men? Well, the Nephilim were living at that time, and also after that. They were mighty men of ancient origins and well known.
The Nephilim, or giants in the King James Version, are the offspring of these unions according to Jubilees. The angels are the angelic watchers who, although sent down to instruct mankind, fell from lusting after the daughters of men.
If all discourse about the Nephilim ended in Genesis 6:4, it would be difficult to decide whether angels were involved or not. But we have an opportunity to shed light on our mystery from subsequent books and verses of the Bible, starting, for example, with Numbers 13:33.
"And there we saw the giants, Nephilim in Hebrew, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight."
This verse gives us important bits of information. The sons of Anak, the Anakims, seen in other verses, are descended from the Nephilim, translated literally from the Hebrew min Nephilim, and were thus not judged by the flood. If the flood was not judgment upon them, then it is unlikely the writer of Jubilees got his facts right in this case. Therefore, it seems unlikely they had angels in their ancestry. Also, accounting for flood survivors drives a huge coffin nail in the global flood theory, something we will discuss in a further episode.
Anak has a father named Arba in Joshua 15:13, and 3 of his sons are named in Joshua 15:14. Numerous other verses refer to the sons of Anak, or Anakims, a people great and tall, as described in Deuteronomy 9:2.
The King James translators must have had these verses in mind when they decided to call the Nephilim giants in Genesis 6:4. There is nothing in the Hebrew word itself to cause them to believe these men were giants. But if they used descriptions in the post-flood period to help them with the translation, why did it not occur to them that post-flood descendants from pre-flood ancestors demands a somewhat less than global flood? We can only assume that the prevailing belief in a worldwide flood was too strong to depart from it, even when the translated Bible would contain an obvious contradiction.
And great and tall doesn't say anything about angel ancestry, as the imams mentioned in Deuteronomy 2:10 are also described as great and tall.
On balance, everything considered, I think we can be reasonably safe in assuming angels were not dabbling in humanity on an intimate basis. And even if there were any human byproducts that could have stemmed from such dalliances, they were not the rationale for bringing the flood. The reason for the flood had to rest with some other people group, a group of people who were accountable, a people group whose ancestry extended from Adam, Seth, and Enosh when men began to call upon the name of the Lord, Genesis 4:26, but not now.